Welcome to this Explainer, 8th graders. Today we're diving into something really crucial and actually pretty fun about the democratic process. We're talking about how to measure and present the real-world impact of your civic engagement. To make this super concrete, we're going to use a hypothetical model issue as we go along. Imagine you and your classmates have launched a student-led campaign for a safer school crosswalk right by your campus. You did all the hard work, but how do you actually prove it made a difference? Well, that's exactly what we're going to figure out today. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, outputs versus outcomes. Then, selecting feasible evidence, acknowledging your limitations, presenting results objectively, and finally, reflecting on citizenship. So let's see how we move from just gathering data to figuring out what it really means for our community. Starting off with Section 1, outputs versus outcomes. When you're trying to measure your impact, the literal first step is understanding this critical difference between the immediate things we produce and the long-term changes we actually want to see.
Let's define these, because getting them mixed up happens all the time. Outputs are the immediate, quantifiable products of your civic action. Think of them as the daily tasks you just check off your to-do list. Outcomes, on the flip side, are the broader, resulting impact or change in the community. Now, don't get me wrong, outputs are absolutely important because they prove you're out there doing the work. But outcomes, that's the ultimate goal. That's the actual solution to the public problem you set out to solve.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact difference. Let's look at our crosswalk campaign. Say you hand out 50 safety flyers and get 100 signatures on a petition. Those are fantastic outputs. You can physically count them. But your outcomes? That would be seeing a 20% increase in students safely using the crosswalk, or getting a formal review of that intersection by the local school board. Make sense? The outputs were the steps you took, while the outcomes are the safer reality you actually helped create.
Moving right along to Section 2, selecting feasible evidence. Once we know we're aiming for outcomes, how do we actually prove they happened? We've got to find reliable, credible evidence without totally overstepping the resources we have as students.
So, the C3 framework basically tells us we need to evaluate evidence credibility by figuring out its relevance and intended use. Think of yourself as a civic detective here. You're trying to prove your crosswalk campaign actually worked. To do that, you need to check a source's origin and authority, like who wrote it. You've got to analyze its context, see if other sources corroborate it, and look at how experts value it. Basically, you want solid, feasible data that undeniably backs up your claims.
Okay, let's do a quick pause check. If you want to prove traffic actually slowed down at the crosswalk after your campaign, which is better evidence? A quote from your best friend saying, "Yeah, cars seem slower," or a municipal traffic speed report from the local police department? Take a second to think about it. All right, the answer is absolutely the municipal traffic speed report. I mean, your best friend is great and all, but their quote is just an opinion. The municipal report is objective, expert-backed evidence that's derived from real data.
All right, Section 3, acknowledging your limitations. Finding great evidence is awesome, but we also have to practice intellectual honesty. Because let's face it, no civic project is perfect, and literally every dataset has its limits.
So the crucial point is right here in the C3 framework standards. It asks us to construct arguments using claims and evidence, but while doing that, we have to actively acknowledge the strengths and limitations of those arguments. As an 8th grade civic participant, you are expected to openly admit what your evidence doesn't show. And hey, this isn't a weakness, it's actually a massive strength that builds up your credibility.
Here's a perfect example for our crosswalk project. In your final presentation, you might say something like, "We measured traffic speeds for 1 week, and they decreased by 10 miles per hour, but we lack long-term data on seasonal traffic changes." By acknowledging that specific limitation, you're showing the school board or city council that you are a careful, objective researcher. You're not just making wild, unprovable claims. You're stating exactly what you know, which honestly makes the data you do have way more trustworthy.
Which brings us to Section 4, presenting results objectively. This is all about how we communicate our findings neutrally, without exaggerating or taking sides.
In any pluralist system, you're going to have competing interest groups who want totally different things. We call these stakeholder preferences. When you present the impact of your project, you have to separate objective facts from those preferences. A fact is objective evidence derived from data, like stating the city budget currently allocates $500 for crosswalk paint. A stakeholder preference, though, is what a specific group wants, like a parents' association demanding a $5,000 traffic light. Your job as an impartial civic actor is to report on the facts clearly, acknowledging the preferences without letting them warp your data.
Time for our second pause check. Listen to this statement. The school board should install a traffic light because it's the only way to save lives. Is that a fact or a stakeholder preference? Take a brief moment. Right, so it's a stakeholder preference. It uses emotional exaggeration, saying it's the only way to save lives, rather than just neutrally stating the objective traffic data. When you're presenting your evidence of impact, definitely leave that kind of exaggeration behind.
And finally, Section 5, reflecting on citizenship. We've reached the last step of our civic action cycle, where we look back on our engagement and connect it to our broader democratic responsibilities.
Now, what's really interesting about looking at a symbol like the Statue of Liberty is how it perfectly bridges the gap between your local crosswalk and the grand ideals of American democracy. It reminds us that whether you're advocating for a crosswalk or debating national policy, productive civic engagement requires a firm knowledge of our system's foundations and a real willingness to actively participate. The C3 framework also reminds us to apply civic virtues and democratic principles. We're talking about things like equality, fairness, and respect for legitimate authority and rules. When you reflect on your project, ask yourself, did we follow the rules? All civic action, whether you're filing a formal complaint at City Hall or holding up a sign for your crosswalk, absolutely must be lawful, safe, and respectful of legitimate authority. We change the rules by using the democratic processes that were designed to change them. Ultimately, this is what being an engaged citizen is all about. Civic and political engagement is literally how public officials find out what the people actually want. It's how we address public problems collaboratively, make our voices heard, and improve our communities. A healthy representative democracy relies entirely on ordinary people, yes, including 8th graders, participating responsibly and applying democratic procedures to create positive change. All right, let's do a quick, high-energy recap of everything we've covered in this explainer. To measure and reflect on your impact, just follow these 5 steps. 1. Know the difference between your daily outputs and your big-picture outcomes. 2. Act like a civic detective to select credible, feasible evidence. 3. Show your intellectual honesty by openly acknowledging the limitations of your data. 4. Present your facts neutrally and objectively, keeping stakeholder preferences in check. And 5. Reflect on how your actions apply lawful civic virtues to improve your community. Put that all together, and you've got a really powerful framework for taking informed action. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a transfer question to really get you thinking. Now that you know how to measure and present the impact of a local issue impartially and safely, what specific public problem in your own community will you tackle next? Look around your school, your neighborhood, your town. The tools are right there in your hands. The evidence is waiting to be gathered, and your voice totally matters. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I genuinely can't wait to see the incredible outcomes you help create.